and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce to you Alex Lawani from Hungary. He is the managing partner at Interlex Communications. Alex has about 40 years of protocol interpreting experience at high-level governmental and multilateral events. He worked at high-level events as interpreter, for instance, at the NATO summits in 2009, 10, and 12, at the UN Food and Agriculture projects, during NATO defense ministerial meetings, at EU ministerial meetings on security and defense in Brussels. And just a couple of highlights during his career. His VIP assignments include, for example, Joe Biden, Donald Trump, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Ursula von der Leyen, His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, Shimon Peres, Jose Manuel Barroso, Charles Shimoni, and many other NATO Secretary Generals, and of course some of the celebrities, sports professionals, Michael Schumacher, Mika Hakkinen, Robert Kubica, Nico Rosberg, F1 drivers, and of course Tony Curtis when he was here in Budapest. So ladies and gentlemen, now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Alex Lawani, and his topic is going to be protocol in interpretation and interpretation in protocol. Alex, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nicoletta, for this very generous and kind introduction. So good morning, good evening to all of you. My name is Alex Lawani, and first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for the fantastic performance, the fantastic job they've done, and of course, also thank the participants for being here with us. Now, really, after such an introduction, Nicoletta, I think it's hard to say anything, but let me just give you a background why I'm going to talk about the topic of interpreting and protocol. Now, I come from an international family background, and this will matter later on. This is why I'm starting with this. Actually, I'm from a mixed family. My mother's family is Hungarian and German. My father's family is Ghanaian and British. My parents are doctors, therefore, even in my childhood, we used to live in different countries. They worked for international organizations, WHO and so forth. So I actually was born in Hungary, and then I was like 4 years old when we moved to the UK, and then Ghana. We spent some time in France, Germany, Algeria. Now, why this is important is because the essence of what I'm going to say is that everything comes down to intercultural communications. Now, this is what I love actually, and this is what I always say when it comes to protocol. Now, why I became an interpreter? Now, this is important. Since my early childhood, my passion has always been history. And I've been, reading a lot of history books and watching programs, history programs. And then once, I think I was a high school goer, I just saw a footage about the Nuremberg trial, which followed World War II. Obviously, this is when the Nazi perpetrators were prosecuted. And that was the first time, actually, that simultaneous interpreting was used in masses, in high volume, in a professional manner. And I just saw that, all those war criminals were there. And then the judges, the panel of judges, they were also there. And then when someone was and also there was a picture about the interpreters with headphones, headsets, and everything. And then I realized that, whenever Goering was talking, the justices, the judges, did not really hear what he was saying, but rather was listening to the interpreters. So I thought, now this is when you're really part of history. So I thought I want to be an interpreter, and I also want to be there at events like that to be part of history. I have to say that been there, done that. So it really did happen. Now, again, what I did, started to work as an interpreter, and then established my own communications company, and then joined the Association of International Protocol Professionals, the president, the chairman of which is our dear host, Nicoletta Hosso. And then I also specialized, so I became a military interpreter in what I'm really good at, I think, in addition to protocol, is defense and security. And my aim now is to set up a formal training for military and delegation interpreters because it will matter, and it really does matter in course of delegations. Now, why talk about interpreting in connection with protocol? This is what I'm going to cover. I'm also going to cover the role and importance of interpreting, and I'm also going to try to sort of touch upon the issue whether interpreting is part of protocol or not. Now, why? And then the last thing is what is expected, what is required from protocol professionals, heads of protocol, chiefs of protocol, and the interpreters as well, in order to form a good team and to really have a good performance at the end of the day. Now, let's just go back a little bit in history and see how interpreting and the profession itself developed. The Honorable Sava already mentioned Egypt and in the first presentation, and we heard about, you know, the origins of protocol in Egypt. Now, origins of interpreting or translating also go back to Egypt, not only to Egypt, but that's the first instance, that the first era that we have written confirmation of this profession existing, and this was in the 3rd millennia before Christ, so like 5,000 years ago. There was a tomb inscription or a grave inscription which said head of the interpreters, which proves that there were interpreters already in ancient Egypt. But of course, we could go back much further, you know, the Tower of Babylon. We could go, I mean, it is almost as old, I think, as history, or at least as old as different languages exist and communications between different languages exist. The first interpreter who became famous was a lady, by the way, who goes by the name of Lama Lincha. Original name might have been Marina or Malintzin, and she was a Nawa woman, so from the Nawa tribe, and she lived in the Aztec Empire. She was born around 1500, so like 500 years ago. And she died quite young, age of 29, 30 or something. And she became the interpreter of Cortes, the conquistator, during when the Aztec Empire was actually put down by Cortes. Lama Lincha became very famous. She was the one who interpreted between the invaders and the defenders, and then later also made it to Europe. She became, again, very famous. So she's the first interpreter whom we know by name. Now, why, again, to the first question, why talk about interpreting in connection with protocol? Now, protocol is a form of international communications, and together with etiquette, it is a common language. It is a lingua franca. It's a form language at the same time. And what we do by that is we mediate, we relay, we transmit thoughts, messages. Just think of a white table, just think of a formal event, just think of the dress code that you have in protocol. Whenever there's a dress code and you have to wear this and that, or ties or no ties, or formal, informal, this all sends a message. These are all very important messages. It's a form language, and this is what you do with protocol. Interpreting, you do the same. You're actually relaying between languages. You're relaying between cultures. You can do it the right way. You can do it the wrong way. Sorry, I was muted. Just don't. Okay, so it really does matter. Now, so the role of the two, I'm not saying is the same, but actually there's a convergence, and one could barely exist without the other. When we talk about a protocol, if it's in an international environment, you normally need interpreters. Of course, that is changing. We know that more and more international communications will be in English. Earlier, other languages were used, like, you know, language of diplomacy used to be French. So we might think that this might change as well by time. Now, anyway, protocol and interpreting in the current setup, the current international setup, one wouldn't go without the other. And if you get it right, then the interpreting, then all good, then everything is okay. But if you get it wrong, if there is problem with interpretation, then all other efforts you put into an event, into a protocol event, would be undermined and compromised. Now, I'm going to return to that when I talk about what is expected from one party and the other to make it well. Again, interpreting. Probably remember that Sting has a song by the title of Russians. And in that song, there is a quote, which quote is attributed to Nikita Khrushchev, saying, "Khrushchev said, we will bury you," which is quite a nasty thing. It goes as the song goes. Now, this phrase or this quote is actually a result of a translation error. The interpreter just made a mistake. By the way, all interpreters do make mistakes, the best ones as well, including myself. Anyway, the interpreter who translated the words of Khrushchev, Nikita Khrushchev, in 1956, was a very, very famous interpreter, a very good interpreter, widely recognized by international political figures and actors, because he was an interpreter to not only Khrushchev, but later on he was also the interpreter of Brezhnev and also Gorbachev, by the name of Viktor Sukhodrev. Now, what was meant by Khrushchev when he said, "We will bury you," referring to the West, referring to the Western societies, in Russian, this is an expression which would correctly translate, "We shall be present at your funeral," or "We shall outlive you," which obviously is a bit milder, a bit softer than "We shall bury you," meaning that we will kill you. So this is not what he meant when he said that, but there was a great uproar. Obviously, everyone was very upset about this, and a lot of analysts considered this to be a nuclear threat. Yeah, that reminds me of other things. Anyway, but so what happened? He said, "We will bury you," in Russian, and the interpreter who had to translate that out of the blue just translated it in verbatim, but the meaning was different. Now, this is not the only mistake that we know in history. Just from my own practice, I remember when there was a meeting between heads of state, Hungary and the neighboring country. I'm not going to name the neighboring country. And then what happened was that the neighboring country's head of state or head of government said that, okay, solution to ethnic problems might be to resettle the ethnic minorities into the country of origin, which again was very much upsetting, and it made it to the headlines immediately. And then shortly after, there was a communique by the foreign ministry of the given country saying that this is not what the head of state or head of government had said. This was just a mistake in interpreting. And then the interpreter obviously had to agree with that. I know the interpreter, I know it was not a mistake, but that's also part of the profession. Sometimes interpreters are used to be a buffer. It quite often happens that both parties do speak English. Let's say there is a Hungarian and a Polish delegation meeting, both do speak English. Despite that, they would use an interpreter, partly for the reason I mentioned, and partly in case the other party is a native English speaker, they don't want to give the advantage to the other party of using their mother tongue and one party using a foreign language. So this is another reason why they're using interpreters in diplomacy and in delegation. And also, if just imagine this situation, if there is let's say, a German member of delegation meeting with a American statesman. Now, if there is an interpreter and the German happens to speak English, then during the interpretation, or because of the interpreting, the first party would have twice as much time to think about the answer, to formulate the answer properly. So again, it is a useful thing. And last but not least, it is also a matter of courtesy. So if, for example, a Croatian delegation comes to Hungary and you provide a Croatian interpreter, then you're showing respect to your guest. So it is very important. There was another, which I have to mention, another error in interpreting, and this was in my practice, and it was very sensitive. There is a party in Hungary called Momentum, and there was a well-known American speaker of Hungarian origin talking about current politics, and mentioned that Europe needs momentum. And then I just thought that when he mentioned momentum, he was referring to the party that I mentioned, and obviously it was mistranslated. Now, since this was live broadcast on television, which is one of the most difficult things to interpret, I didn't have the opportunity 30 seconds later, when I understood that that's not what he meant, I didn't have the opportunity to correct myself subsequently and say that, sorry, that was not what the speaker meant. Now, again, whenever you come across interpreters and an interpreter claims not to have committed mistakes or errors of that nature in his or her career, then don't employ that interpreter, because that is obviously false and not true. Now, again, back to the question, because I see that my time is quite tight. So back to the question, what is expected from the parties in order to make the whole effort good? First of all, whenever you're head of protocol, you're chief of protocol, or you're the head of a protocol at an event, even though you might not be the chief of protocol, what matters is think in terms of a team. It's always a team effort. And what we're really prone to do is that we think in silos. Everyone focuses and concentrates on the job he or she is supposed to do without regard to others. Now, you always have to think in terms of teams as opposed to silos. And this includes that if you're a head of protocol, you'd also take into account that, yes, interpreting matters, not only protocol matters, but also interpreting matters. So, for example, if there is a motorcade, you wouldn't put the interpreter in the 8th car in the motorcade, because the interpreter wouldn't make it to the meeting when it was actually with the American Defense Secretary and the Hungarian Minister of Defense when they met. It took me like 50 seconds to get from my car to the red carpet where they met, and I was supposed to be there immediately. So again, if you're head of protocol, chief of protocol, think of these things as well. Think of the seating or the seats, the sitting order. Another important thing, think of water and food to be provided to the interpreters, especially when it's a delegation event, because quite often it happens that they wouldn't get anything to drink or eat throughout the day, and that would make their performance worse, which is obviously not the order. And then another important thing is to provide the interpreter with briefs, with background material, and not only think in terms of need to know basis, because if the interpreters understands the objective of the meeting, understands the goal that is to be achieved, then he or she would translate and interpret accordingly and would make a much better job. Actually, interpreters quite often go to areas of operation. I've been to Afghanistan, to Iraq, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. When you're working in a, you're working with the military, and then that requires a totally different stance, a totally different behavior. This is why I said that it would be important, and in some countries that exists, to have special training and education for military interpreters, delegation interpreters. And again, when I say that we think in terms of teams, whenever the delegation is small, so you don't have, the business jet is quite small, you can have only 10 people on board, therefore you probably don't have the photographer, you don't have certain functions are missing. I, beside interpreting, would also shoot photos and send it to my communications department, despite the fact that it's not my job. Otherwise, as an interpreter. But of course, I understand that this is a team effort, therefore we have to do it together. And if you do it together, if you think in terms of teams, both the head of protocol and the interpreters, then the result is going to be good, or at least much better. Now, that much I wanted to tell you about interpreting and protocol. Of course, there is more to it, but our time is up, as I see, in a couple of minutes. And I'd rather answer questions if they come. Yeah. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Alex. It was a wonderful, wonderful presentation highlighting the important interdependent relationship between the protocol professionals and the interpreters, interpretation professionals, because teamwork makes dream work, and it's entirely true. No matter how hard we try as protocol professionals to put the puzzles together and work for the success of the event, if the interpreter is not on time, is not prepared, we haven't contributed to the preparation of the interpreter, we haven't sent them the necessary materials, the background materials on the actual meeting or the event. So this is crucial, because if the two leaders or the heads of the delegations do not understand each other, then obviously it's hard to communicate and move on. We had a question from Donatus. He's asking, what is your worst mistake in your profession as an experienced interpreter, and if any, how did you handle it?
Well, again, thank you for that question. That's a great question. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, so that's a great question. And well, I don't know, I'm a bit ashamed whenever I commit mistakes. So, but let me give you two. So one was this momentum thing, but again, it's not about the specific thing that I mistranslated. It is about the genre. The genre is a live broadcast, interpreting live broadcast. So if there is a live program on TV, like, they live broadcast the meeting between the president of the United States and the president of another country. When there's a live broadcast, or just recently from the US, there was the CPAC, or before that, the presidential candidate debates from the US. Now, that was the most difficult thing to interpret when the two candidates, Donald Trump and Joe Biden, had the debate. And of course, you had to speak for both of them. There was crosstalk a lot of times. And also the MC, or the host, the moderator, there was like three people talking, sometimes crosstalk. Now that's very difficult. And the problem is that if you realize that you might have committed a mistake, since it's live broadcast, you cannot undo it. You cannot repair it. That happened with the, as I said, with this momentum thing. But again, one of the worst things was when I confused the names of two leading soft beverages companies. Well, okay, I mean, come on. Let's be just open and outspoken. So it was the two cola companies, I mean, Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola, and I was interpreting. I was on stage, which is another difficult thing when you're on stage, you're put on the spot. And then there was a very, very, very lengthy speech. My notepad was full. I couldn't make notes any longer. And then they said, okay, thank you very much. And now I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Joe Brown, the president of Coca-Cola Europe, or probably the other way, I don't know, which I translated, Joe Brown, the president of Pepsi-Cola Europe. Now, that was the worst thing, because when you're sitting in the studio and you're translating a live broadcast, at least no one is there. So, you made that mistake, but no one is there to, yeah, so to give you the reactions, but there was a huge crowd there and there was an uproar. Oh, and then, you know, that was really the worst thing. And of course, if you just surf the net, you will find a lot of mistakes committed by interpreters. As I said, this was a very, very characteristic one, the "we will bury you" thing, despite the fact that, as I said, this was one of the best interpreters in the world, Mr. Sukhodrev, Victor Sukhodrev. So anyway, these things happen, and if anyone denies it, then that's not really telling the truth.